comes from the inside out.
When we're living congruently with our values, there's happiness because there is that sense of wholeness.
Wholeness is when the way of your being matches the truth of your being.
Continuing our journey through the fifth agreement, we are on chapter 3. The chapter is called The Story of You. And he talks about, in the beginning of this chapter, that humans try to make sense of the world. And in fact, the first part of chapter 3, he says, for thousands of years, humans have tried to understand the universe, nature, and mainly human nature. And he says, as artists, we distort the truth and create the most amazing theories. We create entire philosophies and the most amazing religions. We create stories and superstitions about everything, including ourselves. And this is exactly the main point. We create them. Now here in this quote is where people can begin to maybe feel uncomfortable with this quote because they don't want to think about the idea. They hear what he is saying and they're hearing it in a literal sense that we create them, meaning we make them up, is what might be assumed he is saying. But that's the whole message of this book, is to not assume. The point he is using, he starts off, I think, rather abruptly so that we do kind of get a jolt of what's going on here. But we create the stories with the word, with the explanation. We create a narrative, I would say, even. So where the truth of something, where a philosophy may be true or a religion may be true, the narrative is the narrative different than the truth. And that narrative really never touches the truth. It's a description, and it's by agreement, like we talked about last time. Because if we use the same narrative with the same words and the same tone of voice in speaking about these things, speaking a philosophy, if we were to go to another country and use those same words, it wouldn't mean the same thing. I think that he, in this book, is wise to kind of push us in a direction to kind of really understand deep truths and understanding the difference between truth and these narrative or story or word or vocabulary. Because we put a lot of emphasis, we put a lot of weight on our particular narrative or our particular vocabulary word. And we do that because of our experiences, and that's where he goes and explains it. We create stories about ourselves, and not the truth of who we really are, but who we believe we are. And he talks about this idea of two yous. He calls one of the yous knowledge. The knowledge is the you, the part of you, and it's what you think you are, the assumptions about yourselves, about ourselves. It is all of the beliefs. And then there's the human part, and that human part existed when you were born, before anything influenced you. That's the truth of you. You standing there is the truth of you. When we start to describe you, we move into the knowledge. I think that is fascinating. He says in the book, when you look at yourself in a mirror, do you like what you see? Or do you judge your body and use all of those symbols to tell yourself lies? Is it really true that you are too short or too tall, too heavy or too thin? Is it really true that you are not beautiful? Is it really true that you are not perfect just the way you are? He says, can you see all the judgments that you have about yourself? Every judgment is just an opinion. It's just a point of view. And that point of view wasn't there when you were born. Everything you think about yourself, everything you believe about yourself is because you learned it. I think that's so fascinating. I think little babies have rolls and rolls of chubby fat, and we love it. And that same density, that same chunkiness as an adult has somehow become unacceptable. We've learned these patterns, and we need to recognize that we learned them. And as we kind of allow that little bit of space in between the truth and opinion, then we begin to open up a space of finding happiness and joy in our own lives. So he says in the book, the problem is not really the knowledge. So it's not really all these opinions. The problem is believing in the distortion of knowledge. And that is what we call a lie. What is the truth and what is the lie? What is real and what is what he calls virtual? What's just the fluff, the fake? And sometimes I think we take too much of the virtual or too much of the lie, too much of the distortion, and we put so much weight on that. And like he says, beauty, thinness, tall, smart, all of these things we put so much weight on, and I don't know if we even really have a truth, if those things really hold any kind of truth. He even says, is it really true that you're not a good human and that you will never be good enough? Is it really true that you don't deserve to be happy? Is it really true that you're not worthy of love? Now we ask ourselves these questions. It's not something we do. We don't look in the mirror and ask ourselves, am I worthy of love? We might not have that conversation with ourselves, but we move through life with this assumption, with this belief going on in our mind that we learn through different experiences, and we believe it. And somehow we've picked up this belief, and that's how we interact in the world. And we don't understand that we've taken on this belief, this actual lie. Someone in the world thinks that you are the most amazing person on the planet. So is the truth that you are the most amazing person on the planet? Yes. Yes. We can believe that, right? Because it's true. It's not false. One of the images that he presents in this book, and I've kind of changed it for my own, into my own narrative, is this idea of a tree. I've used this scenario in my own head all the time as I interact in the world. And if you think of a tree, we have several things that go on with that word tree. I have an image maybe going on in my head, and you have an image of a tree in your head. And those two trees are not the same. So which one is true and which one is a lie? It doesn't work that way. If I write down tree, I'm using TREE. Is that the truth of the tree? If I held up a leaf and I pointed to it and said tree, you would understand what I was saying, but it's not really a tree. And this is how we communicate all the time. With language, with word. And because word is how we communicate, that's where things get complicated. If it wasn't for language, if it wasn't for words, remember last time he's trying to break that down. We assume so much when we communicate in words. It's the way it is. I was listening to the book with my husband, and he said, but then what is the truth? And the truth is that when we're speaking about a tree, if we're both looking at the same tree and we want to talk about it, we're just saying tree, but we're not including every piece of information that is included in that tree. because we can't speak all of that at the same time. Even if we begin, where we begin puts some emphasis on what's more important and not. So I hope you begin to see how language, how our communication with each other gets so complicated and tainted because there's so much agreement that happens. He says, as an artist, there is no right or wrong way to create your art. There's just beauty and there's not beauty. There's happiness and there's not happiness. If you believe yourself to be an artist, then everything becomes possible again. Words are your paintbrush, and your life is the canvas. You can paint whatever you want to paint. You can even copy another artist's work. But what you express with your paintbrush is the way you see yourself, the way you see the entire reality. So begin to use these words to describe your life, and you begin to teach other people about who you are when you use the words in what we are moving into the first agreement, be impeccable with your word. When you speak about yourself impeccably to others, then you create this person, this creation to the world. You have created it. Your word makes all the difference. He says sometimes I can just say one word and it makes a difference. He says I can also use, I can use the word tree, like we said, and you can imagine tree. And he says then I can say the word Godfather, an entire movie presents itself in your mind. And it's such a good example because in thinking about that whole movie, I haven't even seen the whole movie from beginning to end. But I would recognize the music. I know there's a horse head, scene. I know that it's kind of this mob story. And so I come with that word. I have all these images, all these experiences, all of these ideas that show up to me, yet I haven't even seen the movie. And to someone else, that have seen all the movie, they're going to have other scenes that show up of truth that shows up. And what I see, what I know about the movie is my interpretation, you could say, or my art, but it's not necessarily the truth or all of it. When we can do that with just a movie, we can see how being impeccable is important, and we can get way off course when we interpret others and speak to them through that interpretation. He says the word as a symbol has the magic and power of creation because it can reproduce an image, an idea, a feeling, or an entire story in your imagination. Just hearing the word horse can reproduce an entire image in your mind. That's the power of symbol. And again, here he says, just by saying two words, the Godfather, a whole movie can appear in your mind. This is your magic, your power of creation, and it begins with the word. When we can be impeccable with our word, he even calls it maybe the most important of the 4 agreements. He says, be impeccable with your word really means never use the power of the word against yourself. When you're impeccable with your word, you never betray yourself. You never use the word to gossip about yourself or to spread emotional poison by gossiping about other people. I love that word, emotional poison. Doesn't that give such a graphic reality to what happens when we gossip about someone else? Moving on to chapter 4. This chapter is called Every Mind is a World. He says in the beginning, when we are born, there are no symbols in our mind, but we have a brain and we have eyes, and our brain is already capturing images that come from light. We start perceiving light. We become familiar with light, and the reaction of our brain to light is an endless play of images in our imagination, in our mind. He moves on a couple pages later to say, everything you perceive is a reflection of what is real. Just like the reflections in the mirror, except for one important difference. Behind the mirror, there is nothing, but behind your eyes is a brain that tries to make sense of everything. Your brain is interpreting everything you perceive according to the meaning you give to every symbol, according to the structure of your language, according to all of the knowledge that has been programmed in your mind. Everything you perceived is being filtered through your entire belief system, and the result of interpreting everything you perceive. When we're going through our world, there's almost a million things happening at the same time as we are seeing and understanding what's happening and interpreting it and comparing it to past experiences. He calls it, even, we're all in a dream. Life is a dream, that we are kind of dreaming it. We're relating to the past and we're contrasting it. There's a story, it's a tale, I don't know where it came from, but it describes this kind of idea that there's a tradition that the natives were looking out over the water and they could see these strange ripples in the water, but they could never seen something like this, this rippling happening in the water. And so they brought their wise shaman to the beach, and he could see that there were boats in the water. And this is supposedly when Columbus was coming. Christopher Columbus was discovering the Americas. Because they had no reference to what a boat was, they could not see it. There was no place for them to contrast or compare. They did not have that image to retrieve and see. That light had never shone in their eye before, and so they couldn't see it. And it took the wise shaman who had gone beyond this life to be able to see it. I don't know if that's true, but I think that's kind of paints the picture of what we do in our life. As we move through it, we are always in contrast. When that light hits our eye and goes to our brain, the brain has to have a reference for it. And so sometimes a look from someone, that reference point points to something that was negative, and maybe that look on their face isn't. But we are always reflecting our past as we look out our eyes. At this point, he shares the second agreement: don't take anything personally. And this part of the book is my favorite part of the book. I remember the first time hearing it, I learned so many truths. So I hope you'll read the book so that you can read every word that he describes. I'm going to do my best. But he talks about this idea of our experience through the world, and he gives a great illustration. He says, imagine that you're in a movie theater. You walk in and you sit down, and the movie begins, and you all of a sudden recognize the story. And this is your life, and you see everybody in it. You recognize everybody: your mom, your dad, your brothers, your sisters, your loved ones, your children, and everyone. And you see that story. You get up and you go to another theater and you're watching this movie. You realize that you are watching your mother's life. You see yourself in this movie and you know it's you because the experiences are the same, but totally different. You don't even recognize yourself. You don't even look the same, because you're seeing yourself through your mother's eyes. And you see your dad through your mother's eyes. And it's almost like there's this, the characters just emphasize different words or walk a little bit different way or just show up slightly different in the way that your mom relates to from her past, from her experiences. And you watch that, and then you go into another theater and you see your dad and how you look totally different in that movie than in your mom's movie, and how everything's a little bit different. And you go into your partner's movie and it's all changed there, and the way that you recognize the characters by the situations, but you hardly recognize them. Just their mannerisms, their words that they might use a lot are different in each of these movies. You realize something after you watch the movies of all your brothers and sisters, and every time, in every single movie, all the characters, especially yourself, are very different. Imagine, how people perceive themselves. They perceive themselves as quite the scholar or quite the patient person. They pride themselves on their athleticism, so they present themselves in this way, and you just haven't perceived them that way. How are we doing that in our own movies? Because we see it in another. And he says in the book, after seeing all these movies, you decide to return to the first theater to see your own movie once again. You look at yourself acting in your movie, but you no longer believe anything you're watching. You no longer believe your own story because you can see that it's just a story. Now you know that all the acting you did your whole life was really for nothing, because nobody perceives you the way you want to be perceived. You can see that all the drama that happens in your movie isn't really noticed by anybody around you. It's obvious that everybody's attention is focused on their own movie. Everybody's attention, everybody's interpretation is happening with what they carry with them. So you don't have control about what gets put forward, because you don't have control about where they retrieve that information from. He says whatever people think of you is really about the image they have of you, and that image is not you. It all goes back to perception, and everybody's is different. So he says in the book, with this awareness, understanding this concept, so I'll start the quote again. With this awareness, you realize how ridiculous it is to say, my beloved doesn't understand me. Nobody understands me. Of course they don't. You don't even understand yourself. Your personality is always changing from one moment to the next according to the role you are playing, according to the secondary characters in your story, according to the way you are dreaming at that time. At home, you have a certain personality. At work, your personality is completely different. With your female friends, it is one way, and with your male friends, it is another. But all your life, you made the assumption that other people knew you so well, and when they didn't do what you expected them to do, you took it personally and reacted with anger and used the word to create a lot of conflict and drama for nothing. And this is what conflict really is about. It's our expectation that is unmet. And our expectation comes because of all these assumptions we've made. It comes because we're only reflecting what we've known in the past to be true. It only is our own perception of what we want it to be like, not necessarily what it is. And when those things don't measure up inside ourselves, conflict arises. And we only see things from our point of view. And we want others to see themselves and the situation from our point of view. So in order to move past the conflict is really some of these lessons that he's trying to teach. We can realize that, like he mentioned in the Godfather movie or with the tree, that we all have our own perception of things, and therefore there's no need for the conflict. Both can be right at the same time. We can just let it go. In the book, he says, now the meaning of the second agreement is profoundly clear. The second agreement being, don't take anything personally. This agreement gives you immunity in the interaction you have with the secondary characters in your life. You don't have to concern yourself with other people's point of view. Once you can see that nothing others say or do is about you, it doesn't matter who gossips about you, who blames you, who rejects you, who disagrees with your point of view. All the gossip doesn't affect you. You don't even bother to defend your point of view. I love that idea, because when we don't take it personally, when we kind of can just spread this out a little about, this is my perception, that's your perception, and that we'll never be able to get to a point of total understanding because of word, because of our experiences, because of perceptions and narratives that we have in our own minds, and you've got it in your mind. Let's not worry about trying to come up with one that is cohesive. And then we don't have a conflict. So we don't take anything personally. The last quote I'm going to share today is, when we don't take anything personally, it is a beautiful tool of interaction. It is a big ticket to personal freedom because you no longer have to rule your life according to other people's opinions. This really frees you. You can do whatever you want to do, knowing that whatever you do has nothing to do with anyone but you. The only person who needs to be concerned about the story of you is you. Like I said before, we cannot control all the perceptions, all the beliefs, all the things that have made up their point of view. So we don't need to create our story to benefit them, because we never will. And we allow them that interpretation. We allow them that narrative. We're working through our own system. And so it allows us to love ourselves fully and love the others and let them have their life. Next time, we're going to push through the third and possibly the fourth agreement. And then we'll move on to the fifth, and the rest of the book talks about that lovely fifth agreement. I hope you're enjoying this. I love all the complexities of this book, and I will see you next time. We invite you to thewholenessnetwork.com, where you'll find the Wholeness Library. Inside, you'll find tutorials, downloads, mini classes, and all sorts of streaming content for you on your wholeness journey.